Most relationships don't collapse in a sudden, dramatic explosion of betrayal. They usually die a quiet, unnoticed death of emotional starvation. We tend to look back at the beginning of a relationship, the late-night conversations, the effortless magic, and assume that's what love is supposed to feel like. But that constant magnetic connection is actually driven by a biological chemical high. When you anticipate what happens next with a new partner, a specific network in your brain lights up. This is driven by future-oriented dopamine, a neurochemical that thrives entirely on the pursuit, the novelty, and the fantasy of what is yet to come. Because this chemical thrill feels so overwhelming, we universally mistake it for permanent love. And that biological illusion blinds couples to the active, deliberate effort that will eventually be required to keep the connection alive. The reality is that early, passionate love has a hardwired expiration date. For almost everyone, this phase lasts anywhere from 12 to 18 months. If we look at this graph plotting the chemical intensity of passionate love over time, you'll notice a steep drop-off right at the 12 to 18-month mark. Your brain's novelty receptors simply become fatigued, and the effortless thrill of romance inevitably crashes. Finding love and keeping love require entirely different biological and psychological tools. The skills you use to pursue a partner, charm, spontaneity, projection, are completely different from the skills required to stay with them day after day. Once that initial high wears off, the survival of the partnership depends entirely on how the couple navigates the immediate aftermath of the chemical drop. To survive, the brain has to transition away from anticipatory dopamine and start relying on here and now molecules. These are the chemicals, like oxytocin and endorphins, that drive long-term companionate love. Earnest, companionate love demands that you discard the fantasy of the honeymoon phase. It requires you to deeply engage with the reality and the imperfections of the partner sitting right in front of you. Making that transition takes immense cognitive effort. It forces both individuals to constantly reorient their daily attention, compromise their schedules, and reposition their personal goals to include another human being. Our critical social circuits were never designed to be used constantly. When we spend our days using engineered digital stimulation to numb the friction of reality, we arrive at our relationships with a nervous system already in a state of depletion. Because transitioning to here and now love feels so difficult for an exhausted mind, couples often subconsciously choose the path of least resistance. Instead of doing the heavy lifting, they begin a silent, passive retreat from each other. Psychologists describe a healthy, mature partnership as achieving this state of relational flow. Once the novelty wears off, the relationship only survives if both partners commit deep, unbroken attention to each other's evolving complexity. But instead of sustaining that flow, many couples substitute deep emotional presence with lightweight, fragmented digital interactions. They send quick texts or share memes, trading genuine connection for low-effort check-ins. This shift creates a profound psychological mismatch. While the physical proximity of the couple remains, the overlapping center of shared presence, where the relationship lives, shrinks. This creates emotional withdrawal. You sit next to your partner, yet that proximity masks a complete psychological absence. The shared space becomes a void. This is why relationships rarely end because of a single catastrophic argument. Instead, they quietly suffocate from this chronic, mutual withdrawal of focused attention. When one or both partners stop paying attention, the ending begins. And strategically speaking, ending any relationship slowly is the most psychologically painful and draining method possible. People often rely on this slow fade because they lack the emotional resilience required to confront their partner. They avoid the healthy friction and vulnerability that comes with initiating a clean break. This avoidance manifests as a gradual withdrawal of energy. It looks like weaponized silence, vague text messages, and a calculated emotional distancing designed to force the relationship to wither on its own. By refusing to name the ending they have already finalized in their minds, individuals choose a path that protects their own comfort at the expense of another's closure. It is an act of emotional cowardice that favors personal avoidance over the weight of the truth. The disappearance of that initial dopamine spark is not a failure, and it isn't necessarily a sign of incompatibility. It is simply the natural biological crossroads that every single relationship must eventually face. Lasting, companionate love is not something you passively fall into. It is an active, deliberate, and often difficult daily practice. True connection requires you to consciously choose to be present with another person, over and over again, even on the days when the interaction lacks the electric thrill of novelty. Love ends the exact moment that active choice stops being made. The biological high fades first, but the relationship silently snaps long before the final physical goodbye.